and they can be so frustrating. Tons of thread breaks, bad trimming, just all sorts of fun like that. We get a lot of bad designs through the Melco tech support group, and so I've saved parts of them so I can show you what we diagnosed and shared with the customers, so I can share it with all of you. So the first thing we'll start with is very thin columns. So let me open up a sample of lettering. So this has different fonts that are in DesignShop, and you can see the curly font up here is a great font for kids' garments and whatever. It just happens to be on the real thin side, so you want to be really careful about how small that you put it. We put recommended minimums and maximums in DesignShop for each alphabet to kind of help you, coach you along on recommended sizes, and you can exceed or make them smaller if you do stuff like add column, pull offset, and lighten densities and things like that. But certain fonts are just made thicker and they're going to work better smaller and stuff like that. So if I look at this curly font right here, you can see this red dot right here. Believe it or not, that represents the diameter of the needle. A 75 needle is 7.5 points wide. So if I measure this, and here's the ruler, I'm going to get you guys used to using this ruler to measure distances, because that's really the only way you're going to find out. So I grab it, and you can see if I measure across this red dot, it is 7 points. So that's about 70 needle, in other words. So if we're trying to stitch across this thin shape, you can see it's basically the needle has nowhere to move across. It's kind of pounding in one place. So you have to be careful in designs when you see very, very thin outlines. Maybe somebody shrank a logo 4 times before it got to you, and the satin widths or the column widths really, really thin out. So you can see in the list there's other choices that will get thicker and thicker, and they're better choices when it comes to really, really small letters. If we're talking half-inch or inch or whatever, it's not an issue, but our life tends to be in those small little letters, 1/4 inch, and so that's where we have to spend a lot of our emphasis. So when you come into serif letters, you have to be careful also, like Times New Roman, I think the minimum is 1/2 inch. Because of the serifs. Serifs are the part of the letter that flares out at the ends, if you want to call it that. And well, if I use my ruler, which I have a hotkey set up for it, and I measure across the thick parts, yeah, 12 points. We want to try and stay over 10. 11 to 12 is really about the minimum that you want to do. So that's fine right there, but if I measure the thickness of the serif, which is right here, it's 6 points. Remember, our needle is 7. So this wouldn't be a really good choice for small lettering. That's why it's designed to go a 1/2 inch. You see right now I'm running at 1/4 inch. Alright, so there are different fonts that fatten up the serifs. Right here, Micro Times is a font that I did, and you can see that the serifs are thicker in proportion to the rest of the letters. So that's not a bad choice for 1/4 inch and above. Smaller than 1/4, here's a mini Micro Times that I did, and to get over the serif problem, instead of turning them 90 degrees to the horizontal columns, or vertical columns, we just flare them out at the end. When this thing is, 3/16 of an inch, 5 to 6 millimeters, whatever in size, you don't notice that it doesn't turn the serifs. It's just a flare, and it tends to look good. Microblock is a good small alphabet, stuff like that, but when you get designs that come through your facility, a lot of them are going to be in expanded. Your choice is to use the ruler and measure the distances across. How do we fix that? Well, for something like small text that's alphabet style in DesignShop, you can easily go in and add pull offset. So I highlight it, I right click, go to properties, I go to my pull compensation tab. Pull offset is the one we want. Whatever number you put in here is to each side, so it's doubled in effect. So start with 1 and see how it looks. If you need to go 2, that's 4 points more. That's going to be pretty much. But usually 1 pull offset is about 20% if you have a millimeter or so column that are very small. And so that's going to be enough to add to it. If it is an expanded text, you got to design in DST or EXP or something like that from a customer. Your choice there is to go to the Scale tab. And what you want to do there is increase the column width right here. I like to use the offset here, so here we could put in 1 or 2 and it would have the same effect, just on expanded data instead of wireframe. So make sure you use your ruler. That's going to help you a ton diagnose problems. A lot of times you can hear this in the machine. It makes sort of a clicking sound if it's not really moving left to right, if the stitches are piling up. That's always a good indicator. Really well digitized designs just sound better when they run. Okay, so let me move on to the next, which is too many layers. Other than very thin columns, too many layers and also incorrect or missing or too many lock stitches tends to be the lion's share of the problems that people have. So I'll open up another one here to show you. Too many layers. So this one here, if I go into 3D, you can see it looks like a normal logo, but it has some issues. So if I zoom in, you can see that the dark colored fill is not removed. It's not a hole cut out where the white is going to go over it. So you want to keep your layers, or the layers in the design should be 2 or less. 3 is a very sort of rare occurrence. Sometimes on like eyes, whether it's wildlife or whatever, you kind of have to go 3 layers in a small little area. So this is a problem because we have a full layer of the dark color, a full layer of the white for the shield, and then also we're going on top of it again with the gold. That's not a good idea. So how do you fix this? Well, if I show you this is a complex fill, all I have to do is add a hole to it. If this was digitized into native OFM and wasn't a DST, EXP, or PES, or one of those expanded files, you can easily fix it. So over here we have our holes, and I would just digitize. I'm going to do this quick because I want to watch me work. But if it, you should go inside the edge so we have some overlap. And that's all there is to it. So now it removed that, and the white is the first layer that's actually on the fabric. So we have 2 layers in this area. We're still going to have 3 where they kind of overlap in areas, and that's okay. It's much better than trying to put 3 or 4 layers together. So be careful of that and look out for that in your designs. I see a fair amount of designs where they just don't cut holes. You don't want to cut holes all the time. You would never cut holes if you're going to put 1/4-inch letters on top of a fill, for example. Just larger areas, but this is a pretty big size area and really makes a difference. The other thing that happened here is that the excuse me here, I got people trying to contact me. The other thing that's happening here is the stitches are all running parallel for the fills, so that's it's an exactly horizontal dark fill and a horizontal white. That's going to cause the layers to blend together, and it's going to be hard to keep the white on top and make it clear. So if that situation does come up where you have to go with 2 layers of fill in a small area, you want to change the direction of one of them so that they don't blend in together. So we shoot for blending sometimes, but this is a case when you wouldn't want it. So have a look at the layers, be careful about that. Next thing is bad tie stitches. So I will open up a very small design, and you can see right here, this is, if I expand it, expanded. So we can't go in and change properties as easily. We have to do a lot of stuff through the scale key. So if I look at this design, they're claiming that they have terrible thread breaks before the trims. Slingshots, all sorts of great stuff like that is what you might know it by. So how do I check this out since it's an expanded? Well, I have to go to the Stitches tab. You can do it up here if you toggle between the two. It'll just switch from one to the other. This one, you can keep them both, and I could drag this across and it would show me all my elements as well as the expanded list. I have to shrink this down for this presentation, so bear with me. This is the Stitches tab. This tells you exactly what's going on with the stitches in the design, every single stitch. So you remember from math class, X and Y. X is left and right, Y is up and down. This is the X movement from the last stitch. This is the Y movement from the last stitch. This is the row that you're most concerned with because it is the length. So this is the overall length of the stitch, and that's really what we care about, like I showed you with the ruler. So if I look at this, here's the start of the design, and you can see that it shows the stitch, then first stitch, second stitch. So we go 10 points, 1 millimeter forward, backward. Okay, not my favorite lock stitch, but it'll work. So the tie-in really is not a problem. See if I'll just get this out of the way so you can see it. Okay, so if I go to the end of the design, you can see that I'm coming, not me, the design is moving up the satin stitch, coming to the end. Okay, so that's basically the end. Now there is, look at the length of these stitches right here. They're all underneath the diameter of the needle. A lock stitch is about 6, 7, 8 points wide. These are half that. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, that hurts me to go through that. On something that this is very small, 2 lock stitches would be plenty. You don't want to keep drilling it because as they go in the same hole, you're either going to get a hole in the garment or your thread is going to break because you can only fit a certain amount of stitches down the same hole in the fabric. So you can diagnose a lot of problems by pulling up the stitch list and just going through it. Mainly, you're probably going to focus on the jumps, so that's where it finishes stitching and then moves without sewing. That's going to tell you where your lock stitches are before and after your tie-ins and your tie-offs. Have a look and see how good or bad, or if they're there or not, or whatever. In this case, there's way too many. So this is really easy. I mean, if it's one design, I could just highlight what I want and hit delete. See, they're all going away. So I can remove, that's sort of hand editing, to now I just have 2 of them right here. Another thing you can do while your machine, if it's a newer machine, we have under Tools, Options, and Advanced mode, there is Enable Tie-ins and Tie-offs. What that will do is it goes through the design when you load it, and it looks at the patterns of the tie-ins and of the tie-outs, and it will filter out the garbage and put in a nice, decent length, good pattern lock stitch. When possible. That's enabled by default on your machine, so it should filter out some of this garbage, but here again, it's got to figure out a whole lot of stuff. So if you can help it, delete one or two of them, that would be great. If you have a whole lot of bad designs like this, the filter should be cleaning up a lot of garbage to take care of some of that. Okay, so that's too many lock stitches. Next scenario is no tie stitches. This one happens to be in wireframe, so I'll just go back to the project tab again. If I expand it, you can see I have elements, not just expanded, so I know it was digitized in DesignShop. And so this design is not catching. The tie-in stitches are not there, so it doesn't have the ability to tie the top thread to the bobbin thread. So how can I check that? Well, if I look at the first property right here, the first element, and go into properties, and I go into my tie and tie off tab, you can see that these are blank. Unless you're digitizing your own with walk normal, which is just for people that are weird, kind of like me, although I don't do it anymore, but I used to, you would always want these on. And we have them set up so if you just enable them, you should get values like style 1, that's a back and forth motion, 7 points and 3 stitches. You always want an odd number of stitches. Then enable tie off, style 1, 6. We'll decide how many you need based on how wide the element is. It's kind of an automatic thing, which is really pretty cool. So that's all I have to do is to change the properties and enable these, hit apply and save it, and now it would have lock stitches. Actually, what I would want to do is select the whole design. I would go into properties, and you can see they're indeterminate because some are on, some are off. I would just want to turn them on for everything, set my values like I explained, and boom, now you have lock stitches for the whole design. Save it out and it should be good from here on. Okay, let me make sure where I am. Missing lock stitches, so we did that. So too many ties is of course the next one. Alright, so here's a part of a design, and it's in expanded, so hard to see a lot unless I go to the stitches tab. Let me drag this so you guys can see. So the start of the design right here is a 6-pointer, 9/8. So those aren't bad, except for look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Gee, way too many again. If I move forward, you can see that it's trying to do this line, and it's pretty tight. So I would be tempted to leave this, but you could put an additional one in between if you needed to. I want to show you the tie-offs here, so let me finish. Oh yeah, let me see. Okay, so right here is where it starts, and then it goes 5 points, 5, 5, 5, and then it starts sewing. Those are kind of tight. I would be tempted to try and at least remove one, so that you increase the distance between the two. So simple, remember I said delete them, and then you can also move them around. I mean, easily I can just actually click on the stitch, go into wireframe expanded editing mode. Once I find the stitch, I can just take and move it longer, do whatever I want to extend the distance. Okay, so let me check. I swear there was another one on this that I wanted to show you. There's a zero motion right there, meaning that the machine stitched twice without even moving. That's not a good thing, but one occasional tight stitch isn't going to kill you. You're looking for the clusters like I showed you with 5 or 8. That's the ones that are going to give you the true problems. Alright. I think that's all I want to talk about on that. So if this was expanded, it is, and it had no lock stitches on it, what would I have to do? Well, the machine is going to put them in like I explained, but to be positive, save it for the file. You're going to send it out to another subcontractor or whatever. You kind of want them inside the file. If the design has no lock stitches on it, all I need, and it's expanded, I can select the whole design. I can right click, go to properties, back to the tie tab, and I can turn these guys on. So if I turn them on, it's going to actually add them to the design, and you're going to see that it's added some stitches, some tight stitches in the tie-ins and the tie-offs. Alright, so the style that you pick usually is style 1. Style 5 is a good tie-in stitch for larger shapes. Here it is. Here it's a plus sign, so it's really going to pull itself back to the center. I like to use this if I'm having problems tying in on thick fabric. Maybe you've got a design from somebody that wasn't exactly digitized for polar fleece, or I use it on puff too, stuff like that. So larger elements, try style 5. I think you'll like it. You can easily swap between the two. Okay. Next problem is I'm running the design and there are no trims. It's trailing the thread from A to B, and I don't want that because I don't want to have to hand trim the thread. So I have a sample here. So if I look at this one, you can see that I have thread trailing between where it should be trimmed, between the words in this case. So how do I fix that? Because when I look at this, it's in expanded. Well, there's two ways. In OS, in Advanced View, Tools Settings, there is jumps for trim. Also in DesignShop, under Tools, Options, we have expanded open jumps for trim. This is set at 3. Meaning there needs to be 3 jump stitches in the file to count as a trim. If it has less jumps, then it figures you don't want to trim. So all you need to do is lower this number. So I have it at 3. If I set it at 2, hit apply OK, what I have to do is reopen the design. And then now you can see that it's trimmed. So lowering your jumps to trim count will make your machine trim more often. Now the thing you have to consider on this is you always need those lock stitches, the tight stitches at the beginning and the end before trims. If you don't have them, these are really small letters, so it's probably not such an issue. I don't like it, but it's probably not going to come unraveled. But that's exactly what happens when you get larger letters and fills, wider satins. After you wash it a few times, the stitches start coming out of the fabric, and that's not what we want. So be careful about that you just don't go firing in trims all over the place without having the lock stitches. If you do it in wireframe, if it's an OFM, DesignShop's smart enough to know that if you trim, then I need to add the tie-ins and the tie-offs on both sides of that jump. In expanded, it's a different story. Okay, so if I would highlight, let me see, right here, and I go into the expanded editing, it ends here. So if I back up by using the arrow keys, you can see it's doing the column, done. There are no more. So there are no lock stitches in this one. So you can easily add lock stitches just by left clicking. Right click is a jump, left click is a regular stitch. Now I want to change the order, right? Because I want to switch them, because a lock stitch always kind of goes in the middle. So I can do something like this. I could even add a second one, take and cover it over, carry it over farther, sorry. And so I've added my lock stitches and I've added the trim. I would want to make sure that there's some tie-ins on the other side when it goes, but that's the way to kind of hand edit in a lock stitch or two, and make sure you just go through it with the arrow keys. It'll go stitch by stitch and you'll be able to exactly see what's happening without a doubt. So that's the way to add trims, so to speak, in your design that is not trimming like it should. Okay. Sometimes you can see super wide jump stitches or wide columns, but they are jump stitches is what makes them look kind of funny. So I have one here I'd like to show you. Right here. Alright, and so let me drag. These are on top of one another because it's made from the same file, so I wanted to show you that. So here, if I look at the wireframe, you can see it looks solid. I can do 3D. Yeah, not bad. Why am I missing the stitches? That's what always seems to come up, is I load the design and it's missing stitches. The reason for this is the black lines are our way of indicating jump stitches. If a stitch is over a certain length, in this case about 1/2 inch, the software automatically will split that distance in two. We're not concerned about that. Machine, Maya and EMTs and all that we've produced for 20 years, they don't have a jump stitch solenoid, because since we feed the thread, we don't have that problem. Traditional machines, they have a take-up lever like we have, and that's their only way to feed out more thread. It can only feed 1/2 inch of thread per rotation. So what happens is it feeds the thread, and then there's a mechanism that stops the needle from dropping, because you don't want to stitch in the middle, and then it feeds again and does it on the other side, and it keeps doing that back and forth and back and forth. Your machine will actually filter out these jump stitches because there's no need for them. Since we feed thread, we can feed whatever we want. But when they come in, they look kind of like this, and that is a ferocious looking thing. Actually, if you load it to your machine and your jumps to trim setting I just talked about is 3, it's gonna stitch this just like the blue looks right next to it. But it is sort of a heads up that, wow, if I have dashed line stitches, that means that they're very long, and so I better have a look and make sure that everything is okay on that. This one was actually digitized for puff, and some machines can't even handle a 1/2 inch, so this split it up more into shorter jump stitch segments. But anyway, keep an eye out for that. You should only see it in expanded. You wouldn't see it in a wireframe OFM file, because we're showing you what we're going to stitch. Okay. The way, yeah, that if that was trimming on your machine, the way you would get rid of it is to turn the jumps for trim in OS up. You can go 8 if you want. 3 is the default. If you put it up to 6, you're going to sew this design with no problems. Unless there is just one jump in the middle, then it wouldn't matter what you have. Your setting that's currently on there is going to be fine. Okay, sometimes I find this kind of wild. When it comes to alphabet text, you always want to use an alphabet like or OFAs, or the ones that, you know, show up all over the place in the alphabet tool. The bottom of the list is TrueType fonts, and you can also use TrueType fonts and they'll be for alphabets. Just a sec. Um, but your first choice, if you have it, if you can, is to pick an embroidery alphabet and not a true type font. Reason being, the computer generates the stitches based on the true type font. No human actually traced it and knew what they were doing. I mean, we try and build the intelligence in, but there's a lot that goes into making alphabets the human way. So there's an Arial, say, alphabet. There's also Arial true type font. I see some just terrible lettering, but they're using the true type when they have the alphabet to use also. So always use alphabets for your first choice. There's one sample here. So here shows you kind of the problems that exist with it. So this is Kunstler script. Anyway, you can see how drastically thin it is. This is going to have trouble because of the needle penetration and the thin satins that I showed you at the beginning. So how do I fix this up? If it was expanded, I would do it through the scale key. Here, since it's true type, we give you a bold. So if I make it bold, I've increased the thickness, and now the machine at least can go ahead and stitch it. Or you could go and add pull offset like you want. But there is crazy true type fonts. I've seen the wildest looking fonts out there. You know, real grunge letter type stuff and all. The software is going to have a hard time converting that anywhere. So just be careful going too far off into the fringes when it comes to using true type fonts. Alright, so kind of funny. Being a digitizer forever, people say, you know, I digitized this, and then you get the file because you need to see what's the matter with it maybe, and you find that it's vector converted. Most of you probably know that we have a feature in the software where you can bring in vector or raster artwork and make stitches out of it without having to trace the shapes. It's a cool tool. It's not for everything. This one here is really pretty crazy. You can see it has a whole lot of different shapes and all this stuff going on, even though it's one color. It should show up because the stitch directions change. That reflects the light differently, and so it's probably a pretty cool design. But it has a lot of issues. How come? First of all, when you see it, oh, it's in, you know, it's a wireframe design, so I should be able to you know, go in and edit it. But look at all this. I mean, this stuff, some of it is not even connected. It jumps from here to here, and it's trimming, you know, sometimes after one element. I mean, that's 14 stitches and then moving on. So a lot of times you can tell because the green splices, there's sort of a giveaway that somebody converted it using the automatic software. Not that all of it's bad, but if you would look at this design, you can see that there's just too much going on. This is not a good candidate for vector conversion. But again, a heads up is, look at all the splices. This splices sort of define separate regions, so you can turn the stitches different direction within one element. So like a letter A, you could imagine it on. But this is really pretty brutal. So if you open up a wireframe design and you highlight some elements in it and you see the green lines all over the place, it probably means it was vector converted, and would be better done by a human if it's so intense. Okay. The other thing, last thing that I want to talk about is sometimes you might get a design in and your sew out comes out a little bit thinner than other machines. The reason is a lot of other machines on the market will fatten up the stitches when you load the design. We don't do that, but we give the ability to customize it however you want. And so it could be some case that you start with the same expanded file and somebody is getting a lot thicker stitches than you are. So you can read up on this. Hopefully a trainer explained it to you. It's auto compensate. So in OS advanced mode, you go Tools, Settings, and Settings tab, and auto compensates halfway down the window. And probably what you do is put in 1 point of pull offset, and then it will tell you, hey, you fattened up the software, so I need to reload the design. And so it will reload it when you hit yes, thickened up. Then also every future design will also be thickened up by that proportion. So if you need to do that, sometimes that's the easy way if you're always getting really thin designs or you're doing subcontracting work with other vendors and stuff like that. So checking out auto compensate, 1 point can fatten up a fair amount of designs, make them look a lot crisper than they were originally. Hopefully that helps you diagnose some designs, keep track of those lock stitches and the very thin columns, and we appreciate you being a Melco customer. We will see you next time. Thank you.